the DNA breakthrough that solved an impossible murder for years.
Abduction and death of 8-year-old April Tinsley has haunted this community for over 30 years.
This case made no sense. There was a victim, there was evidence, but there was no suspect. No name, no face, nothing investigators could hold on to. It was the kind of case people quietly called impossible, because everything that should have led somewhere didn't.
Often, I carried her picture in my wallet for a long time.
Leads went nowhere. Witnesses had nothing. And the one piece of evidence that mattered most was there from the very beginning, but couldn't be used, not yet, so the case sat still until technology caught up. And when it did, that same piece of DNA, once considered useless, suddenly became the key to everything. What it revealed was something no one had seen coming. At the time the crime was discovered, everything pointed to one frustrating truth. There was evidence, but not enough to move forward. Investigators secured the scene quickly. They documented every detail, collected every possible trace, and followed standard procedure with precision. It was clear from the beginning that this wasn't random. There were signs of planning, of intent, of someone who understood how to leave as little behind as possible. And yet, something had been left behind, biological evidence. At the time, that should have been the breakthrough. DNA was already being used in investigations, and in some cases it had been decisive. But this situation was different. The sample was too limited, too degraded, not clean enough to produce a complete profile. So while investigators knew it was important, they couldn't use it in a meaningful way. That created a strange kind of tension within the case, because they weren't starting from nothing. They had something real, something that came directly from the person responsible. But it wasn't enough to identify them, so the investigation moved forward without it. Witnesses were interviewed, timelines were built, possible suspects were considered and then ruled out. Every angle was explored, but none of it led to a definitive answer. And over time, the same pattern began to repeat. Leads that looked promising collapsed. Details that seemed important led nowhere, and the one piece of evidence that could have solved everything remained unusable. Eventually, the case slowed down. Not because it wasn't important, but because it had reached a point where no further progress could be made with the tools available. It became what investigators often refer to as an impossible case. Not unsolvable in theory, but unreachable in practice. Years passed, then more years. The world changed. Technology advanced. New methods of analysis began to emerge. Methods that could extract information from samples that were once considered too damaged or too small to process. And with those advancements came a new opportunity. Cold cases across the country were being reopened. Evidence that had been sitting in storage for decades was being tested again. This time with far greater sensitivity and accuracy. This case was one of them. The original sample was retrieved carefully. Preserved all those years, it had never lost its potential, only its usability. Now, that was about to change. When it was sent for modern testing, investigators weren't expecting a miracle.
More up there, there's a little girl dancing with her angels. She's celebrating. So when you get on your knees tonight and you talk to her in your dreams and prayers.
They were hoping for something, anything, that could move the case forward. What they got was more than that. The advanced analysis didn't just confirm the presence of DNA. It began to reconstruct it, piece by piece. The fragments that once seemed too incomplete started forming a usable profile. Not perfect at first, but strong enough to open doors that had been closed for years. For the first time since the case began, there was direction. But there was still a problem. When the newly developed profile was run through national databases, there was no match, which meant one thing. The person responsible had never been caught before. No prior convictions, no record, no existing DNA on file. Once again, it felt like the case might stall. But this time, investigators had something they didn't have before ops. Because DNA, even without a direct match, can still tell a story. It can point to connections, to relatives, to people who share small pieces of genetic information without even knowing it. And that realization opened up a completely different path. Instead of asking, "Who is this person?" investigators began asking a new question. Who are they related to? And that question was about to change everything. That single question shifted the entire strategy. Instead of waiting for a direct match that might never come, investigators turned to a method that had only recently begun to change cold cases:
The Deckers contacted the authorities and she was interviewed.
She was just an innocent child.
Genetic genealogy. The idea was simple in theory, but complex in execution. If the suspect's DNA wasn't in criminal databases, it might still appear indirectly in public ancestry databases. People who had submitted their DNA for family research, distant relatives, unknown connections, could provide the missing link so the profile was uploaded. And at first, nothing obvious appeared. No close matches. No immediate answers. But that wasn't unexpected, because what investigators were looking for wasn't a name. It was a pattern. Small segments of shared DNA began to appear. Tiny overlaps with individuals who had no idea they were connected to a criminal investigation. These weren't close relatives, not siblings, not parents, distant connections. And that's where the real work began. Analysts started building family trees, one branch at a time, mapping out generations, identifying common ancestors, and slowly narrowing down the possibilities based on geography, timelines, and known movements. It was meticulous, time-consuming, but incredibly precise. With each step, the pool of potential individuals became smaller, until eventually it came down to just a few. And then, a name that had never appeared in the original investigation. No criminal record, no prior suspicion, nothing that would have brought attention to him before, which is exactly why he had never been identified. But now, everything pointed in his direction. Still, investigators needed confirmation. Because in a case like this, after years of uncertainty, there could be no mistakes, so they moved carefully. Surveillance began. Quiet, controlled, focused on routine, just like so many other cases where suspects had lived undetected for years. They watched, waited, observed, until the opportunity came. The suspect discarded something, an everyday item, something no one would think twice about. But for investigators, it was everything. It was collected and sent for testing. And when the results came back, there was no doubt. The DNA matched perfectly. The same sample that had once been too damaged to use had now identified the person responsible with absolute certainty. After all those years, the impossible case had an answer. The arrest didn't just close a file, it validated every decision made at the beginning. The choice to preserve the evidence, even when it couldn't be used. The belief that one day, somehow it might matter. And it did. For the people connected to the case, the moment brought something that had been missing for years. Not relief in the traditional sense, but clarity, an end to uncertainty, a name where there had been none. A truth that could finally be acknowledged. And for investigators, it reinforced something powerful. No piece of evidence is ever truly useless. It might not speak immediately. But that doesn't mean it won't speak at all, because science evolves, technology advances, and what once seemed impossible can become inevitable. In the end, the case wasn't solved by luck. It was solved by patience, by preserving what mattered, and by refusing to accept that impossible was the final answer. Because it wasn't, it was just a matter of time. If this story made you realize how one small piece of evidence can outlast years of silence, how truth can wait quietly until the moment it can finally be revealed, then you're starting to see what makes these cases so powerful. Because some answers don't disappear, they just take time to find. So if you want more real cases, deeper breakdowns, and stories that stay with you long after they end, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who finds these stories fascinating, and subscribe to the channel because the next case might already have the answer hidden inside it.